Okay, so it's been a while since I've done one of these videos, and I thought with RIAT fast approaching, I'd sort of dive into my images from last year. I've settled on this folder from the departures day last year, and I've just picked a few photos out to edit. I've just coloured them yellow just so I can easily pick those up. So, sort of a few shots that have caught my eye, if you like, and I think as a nice little tutorial really, I'm going to show you how I would approach this edit of this the Phantom. So this is the Phantom leaving for the first time. Of course, those of you who have probably read all the stories there knew that this aircraft was actually denied entry to French airspace and had to return. Great for us photographers, maybe not so good for the crew, but we weren't complaining. So I think it'd be quite a nice thing to do is just to show you how I'd approach this. And it's a little bit of a tricky edit. As you can see, there's not a huge amount of light falling on the aircraft, but there is some nice stuff happening in the clouds behind. Almost framed nicely in this patch of blue sky. And of course, detail in those clouds that we can play with later. If I come to my history down here, you can actually see I've worked a little bit through this before I decided to call it a night. So I think as an example, I will start with this shot here. Let's just make that so it's zooming into 100% each time rather than too far in. So I settled on a cinematic style crop. So this is a 21:9. This is a image, a crop ratio used within sort of cinema and cinematic style images, which just gives it this long, thin letterbox crop. You can easily put that in yourself by just entering custom, and you literally write in 21:9. So super simple, and that will give you a custom. Just bring it into this custom area here, basically. So we're happy at that. I'm happy at that. So basically, I'll just show you how I approach an edit like this. So I always start with more than likely composition to start with, and anything that's wrong. So if we had any noticeable dust spots, any clutter that I want to remove, I'll probably do that first. Or if this was an incredibly noisy image, I would probably run it through Lightroom's denoise down here to sort that out, so I'm working with a nice clean image to start with. In this case, I might just tick the lens corrections to start with as well. Sometimes I'll just batch copy the auto settings across all my images, so I don't have to remember to tick that box each time until the end. Okay, so I always turn my images to black and white to start with. So I do this just to, well, basically just to separate colour and tone, so I can focus on getting the light right first. So we'll do that. I'm happy with the overall exposure, other than what's on the jet. So I'll start at the blacks, and by holding the Alt key down and dragging the slider at the same time, this literally is just setting the black point. Anything that turns black on that screen with that key held down means it's turned black and the detail's gone, so we can't recover it. So we will leave it about there. Excuse me. And we do the same for the whites. That Alt key or Option key, I think it is on Mac. And there's already a little bit of clipping around that glint of light reflecting off the canopy, but I'm not too fussed on that. It's those big areas we don't want to be clipping. So you can actually hold the Shift key down and double click, and that will actually set it. Lightroom thinks it's the auto setting, but I don't want to go too far. Actually, I think that's going to look about right. Now the shadows. Now I'm not going to go too far with this, because I actually will use the masking later on to make that adjustment more locally. But that's pretty good here. And then the highlights. Now I don't want to be just dragging these highlights down. Sure, it's doing a good job on the sky, it's bringing that back, but if you actually focus on the aircraft itself, you're actually taking away the tone away from the aircraft, and you don't really want to be doing that. So I'm going to about there. So I often do this method of taking these sliders to the extreme and then backing it off and finding that sort of happy medium. And for me, I think it's going to be about there. And we'll just double check that on the rest of the image. So yeah, it's going to be sort of minus 25 in this case. And of course, I'll do further adjustments to this locally in a moment. The contrast, well, I don't want to use that too much. And something I find I use more often than not is about +5, and that just works for me. So now I'll drop it back into colour, and you might think, oh, that doesn't look right. Well, you'd be right. The aircraft was in the shade, it was cool, and shadows, the shade is associated with the cool colours of cold, so we need to use the white balance to warm this back up. And I'll do that by just clicking on there, and I just like to use the arrow keys on the keyboard just to bring that up until it looks sort of natural. So I think that's looking a little bit too orange. Back it off. It's going to be about there, I think. So anything I'm doing here at the moment is just doing adjustments to the image as a whole, treating the whole image as one thing. And continue out here. I might actually jump to dehaze and see what this brings out, because there's a little bit of atmosphere to shoot through, and these actually treat the blues in an image quite well as well. But in this case, it's going to be very low. It's often overused slider, people dragging this really heavily, and it might treat the sky well, but things go wrong very quickly. So I like to keep that to a minimum, really. You can use dehaze locally on the sky, like with the masks, which I'll come to in a moment. So use the clarity now and see what that does. And actually, it's one of those sliders again, which is very powerful. And in this case, it might only be about +4 again. Just treat the edges around that quite nicely. Now use the texture, and I think the texture is actually starting to affect the sky, which we don't really want. So actually I'm going to leave the texture off, and we'll sort that out with masking. So we should do that now. So I still want to recover a bit of detail on this jet. So I'll open up the masking panel, and I have the choice of using the AI masking feature. So this will do what Lightroom's own brain, if you like, will use its own AI to find the subject. So we can use that now. Old-fashioned way, of course, was just to paint that. So it's done a pretty good job, but things to look for are where it misses. So it's done a very, very good job, because there's plenty of contrast, but there's a perfect example, that mask bleeding into the sky there, and here, and around here. But we can further prompt this mask to refine it. There's no refining slider as such, but we can then ask it to subtract from the sky. So now we'll do that. And actually, that's just prompted it a little bit more and removed it from the sky, and actually saved us a ton of work there. So we'll recenter that. Of course, to zoom in and out in the mask is to hold Shift and Control, and that will bring up your magnifying glass, and you just click and drag. And to move the image around, you hold the spacebar and click and drag. And you can actually hold the spacebar and click once, and that zooms in and out in the increments you selected earlier. So let's actually raise the shadows a little bit more locally until, so we don't want to go too far, because the lighting on that now looks very unnatural. We want to bring it down to somewhere where it looks nice. I'm thinking about there. And a nice little tip here is, if you haven't got too much highlights or anything, is actually to use the white slider. And that's another neat little way of just adding a nice little bit of lifting the overall tone quite nicely there. And you will see it's quite noisy. So we might compact that in a moment. Just have a little play around to see what the contrast does. I think lifting the overall exposure might just work there. I still think that image is a little bit cold on the subject anyway. I might just lift. And what I'm liking is, as we're working through this and using this, we're actually seeing the burners come in and framed against that tail, which you wouldn't have thought was necessarily there. Now we might add a little bit of texture onto the jet itself. Add maybe a little bit of clarity. Actually go a little bit heavier on the texture. It's a gritty jet, but again, push it too far, you can start to see the image break up, so we don't want to do that. So I'm thinking maybe about 8 here. I might just stick +5 on the sharpening. So I'm pretty happy with that on the jet for now, but we can come back to it in a minute. So now I might treat the sky differently. So what we're doing in the masking is actually breaking the constituent parts of the image up. So I'm now going to treat the sky different from the jet in the same way I've just treated the jet there differently from the sky. So let's make a mask for the sky. And now what we might find is we'll bleed into the subject a little bit. So I'm actually going to subtract that from the subject now. And because we've worked in the reverse, actually see it has actually missed those few bits, so I'm going to grab an add brush, make sure the auto masking is on. That will just help follow the edges. I'm just going to paint in those little areas. Turn the feather on the brush up a little bit, so we don't want too harsh edge. Follow those lines all the way around. Make sure we've got all those little bits. Not too bad. A little bit here. If you make a mistake, you can hold down the Alt key and that will bring up the subtract brush and subtract from those brush adjustments only, not the entire mask. Okay, so we'll zoom back out. So that's our mask created on the sky. So now we can use all the same features we used on the jet on the sky. So I might actually use the dehaze now. See what we can bring out of those clouds. Go a little bit too far and the blue starts to look nasty. It brings in some sort of dark colours, but that looks pretty good. I might use the highlight slider now to bring it down on the clouds. The sky. That's actually looking very, very nice. Use the contrast slider to punch in a little bit of contrast there. Again, we're not talking big adjustments here. And the white slider actually raising, it's actually brought a new depth to that. I might just see, might just take the overall white balance on the clouds, on the sky rather, down. Thinking only about -2, and I'm happy with that. But now I'm thinking the jet still looks a little cold, so I'll come back in here. And just warm that aircraft up a bit more again. And I think that's looking really rather nice. So now we'll come back into the global panel. Let's see what we can do with the tone curve here. And this simply replicates your histogram. This curve makes adjustments along that histogram. So down here, if you've got your shadows and your darker areas, lift this and you're going to raise the shadows and those darker areas, and lift up here into the whites and the highlights. So I might just reset that quickly. Lift a little bit. In fact, I'm going to reset it and leave it about there. I want to retain a bit of contrast in that image. So now we come to the colour area. I like to have mine open like this. Yours might look a little bit like that or like this, but I just simply like to have everything open so I can see every colour channel, clicking on all, and just work my way through them. There's not a huge amount of red in this image, although it is attacking the tail lights and probably this burner area slightly. I'll probably leave it that there. Check again with the orange slider. That's fine. Yellow's having a small effect. Green, a little bit. Just going to work through these quickly to help speed things up. That's touching the sky. purples might knock those towards blue. Don't think there's a huge amount of magenta in this shot. That's fine. Now work through the intensity of those colours, so the saturation. Actually, just tweaking that orange slider is bringing the burners out quite nicely. So is the red, so use those in conjunction with each other. Raise the yellow slightly. Green, slight green reflection from the grass it's passing over, but not a huge amount. I'm going to leave that where it is. Same with the aqua. Blues, I find it quite a difficult colour to edit actually. I'm not going to put too much blue into that. Likewise for purple. Now we come to the luminance. So this is simply the brightness of the colour. Those yellows, just touching those areas there. Greens lift slightly. Ooh, that's turning back that nice sky nicely. Do the same with the blue slider. Now the purple, magenta, and that's me work through the colour channel. So if I turn those off, you can see a very subtle difference between the before and after, and all those subtle adjustments of everything we do soon add up to make quite a good image. So let's just see how far we've come. There we go. So we've already brought back all this detail on the underside, brought out more definition in the clouds. There's a lot more going on in that shot now. So much better to look at. Okay, so let's carry on. So color grading panel. This is the only area of Lightroom where we can physically add something in. So this is, you can actually add your own color, and it's used to be called split toning, now called color grading. And you can push colour into the shadows, midtones and the highlights. But that's probably a subject for another video. But one thing to touch on here is this lovely little slider here, the midtones. So this actually can lift your image very nicely. And if you just lift this, it only raises the mid-tonal part of your histogram. And actually it's quite a neat way to just help your images pop a little bit more. And in this case I think I'm just going to place that on +20. There's quite a bit of noise in there, we might sort that out in a moment. But for the most part that's going to stay at that size. Nobody's really going to be pixel peeping on your shot, so don't get too hung up on your noise. Now we come to sharpening. And this is an often overlooked area of Lightroom. This, I believe this slider, if I can find the little tick box, is it there? Possibly it doesn't then. It used to come with just the amount showing. Well, it's okay adding lots of sharpening to this, but it's going to sharpen everything, including the pixels in the sky. So we don't want to do that. What we want to do is actually select where that sharpening is targeting, and what the areas we want that sharpening are along the lines of the image, of the subject even. So if you hold down that Alt key again and drag the slider, the screen will turn black, and now just hone in that sharpening to the areas you would like. So all the way through there, so everything that's white is where the sharpening is being applied to. So we really want to take that away from the sky. We don't mind a little bit of sharpening on the clouds because that will help define that edge and help give the clouds a bit of a sharper edge to them. I think it's going to be quite high in this case. I want to retain some of the lines within the jet rather than just around the edge. So I think 78 is going to be somewhere quite good. You can use this little window here as well to help you here. Use that roundel as a target. Just bring the sharpening up, and you should see everything getting slightly more defined. Excuse me. In this case, I think it's going to be around 98. Looks quite good for this. And now we will add a little bit of radius. Now simply the radius is just how thick that sharpening is being applied to a line. So set at 1, it's just 1 pixel's worth of sharpening. Drag it over to here, that big bold sharpening. If you hold the Alt key down, it'll show you what's happening. I'm adding big, almost permanent marker sized sharpening, but I think for this 1.2 seems to work well with this setup I find, which was the 80D and the 100 to 400. I'm happy with the way that's looking now, and of course detail, relatively self-explanatory. So we'll just bring back some of the detail in between those lines. So we're now happy. I'm now happy with that. I could throw this through AI denoise, or I could do the denoising myself. And the old-fashioned way, of course, is just to use this slider, pull it around, find where the things. But what I have found is the AI denoise itself is fantastic. But like with all things, it takes a bit of responsibility not to push this slider too far. So although it's artificially intelligent, you still have to set the amount that it's applying to this image. So I'm hoping this works with the screen record going. So what this will now do is look at the image and decide where the noise is. And it's very good at getting rid of colour noise, and colour noise you probably don't think is actually there. So here we go. So this shows you an enhanced view. So it actually enhances your image as well, not just removing the noise. And you can see it's gone from soft to quite sharp edge. So it actually almost does a little bit of sharpening as well. So if we go to that roundel we were looking at earlier, which we know was nice and sharp, you can see the difference. And if I pull this up, you can see all the noise, and you start to lose the detail. And this is the big thing. You can spot denoised images from a mile off that have been over denoised. Often very sharp, but devoid of texture. So let's bring this right down to 1, and I'll show you the difference in that here. So even at 1 degree, you can see the difference that that's making. So I might come up to about 15. And of course, crop sensors don't handle the noise in the shadows quite as well as a full frame, for example. And it all depends on camera. So you don't just think it's the same, apply the same setting to all your images. So I'm thinking 15 might be, it says it's going to take 7 minutes. Hopefully that's not the case, but it probably is because the screen record's running. And what this will now do is create another raw file alongside this on your hard drive, with the denoised settings applied and your current edits. So don't worry about, it's not going to reset the image. I'm hoping this is going to take a little bit quicker than 7 minutes. Just waiting for that to work. So 25 minutes or so. Usually I'll be a little bit faster than that, but taking my time to explain things for you. Coming along nicely. Usually without the screen record running, this would be very, very quick. Indeed, and I think these images are on a non-SSD hard drives, and that will also make a difference. Hopefully we're nearly there, but in the meantime I can still use this. Looks like we're about halfway through. We can have another look at how far we come while that's taking its time. So you can see it's not always about having the light, because there is detail there, You don't always need light falling on the aircraft. As nice as that is, we all love to shoot aircraft in crisp, clean sunshine, over our shoulder, for example, which the light was behind us in this case, but the aircraft obscured by cloud, there is enough information there, and you can find it and recover it. But just remember to take things subtly, and that does make a huge difference. Okay, so we're nearly there with the denoise. Just making some faster leaps now. I can hear my graphics cards fired up. Nearly there. Sorry about this, guys. Usually a lot faster than this. And there we go, that should be done. So now this is now opened up the image. If I go back to my library, you should see that the name of the image is now is the original image name, and it's created it into a stack for us. So there's the original file we've just edited together on this in this video. But what it's done is created a copy of that raw file plus the adjustments, and that's now renamed it as the enhanced raw file. So there we go with the settings bar, and I hope you'll agree that that is much cleaner than it was before. Obviously that's not a good reference point, because that is just the same image after being denoised. So let's just open up the image. Not sure what's happened there. There we go. And now the last thing I will do is just hone in on the colour. And a nice little tip here is to use more vibrance than saturation, and that can create quite a nice natural effect. So I'm pretty happy with where that's got to now, although my mind is still very creative on this. Don't want to do that. Let's just make this full screen again. So now what we'll do is, I think I might just add a little bit of gradient. So I want the gradient to appear in just that blue sky only. So it's quite a neat little way you can do this. You can use the colour range and select that colour, and then use the intersect function and pick a gradient. Zoom out a little bit. I'm going to hold the Alt key so it's nice and feathered. Drag that across the image. So remember, we've made that selection, and that's only appearing inside of that blue. Just pull that down to there and darken that down. Pull the blacks down a little bit. Just a little tweak with the whites. That's nice. We'll come back to the sky select and see if we can just push a little bit more. Sky. Thinking that blue looks a little bit harsh now, so I might come down here, and you can use these droppers, click and drag, just take that back. I might actually just brighten that up. That's better. I might come down back to the subject, just add in a little bit of saturation to the subject. I don't go too far with that. Those whites a little bit more. Just check where we're clipping. We're clipping in the sky over here. Okay, so we'll just pull the white back out of the sky. That about there. And I think for this edit anyway, I think we're about done. So I might just add, actually that's the last thing I'll do, add a little bit of vignette. Again, a lot of people like to go quite heavy on the vignette, which is quite nice. And actually, as we're doing that, oh, don't want to press that, sorry. We can actually see a little bit of that jet wash coming into view. So actually, in this case, it's actually helped us to find some more stuff happening with the image. And I'm going to feather this out more using the Alt key again. This will show you where that's being affected, and we want to keep it relatively round, bring it down toward the middle. And to help bring out that area. So we made a sky selection earlier. I'm going to copy that mask, but I'm going to reset, because that's doubled the mask now. I'm going to reset it and use that. I'm going to use that copy of that mask to then intersect it with another gradient, so it's only appearing in the skies. Get a little gradient in this bottom corner here, which I'm hoping just help me to bring up this texture in the jet wash. And then I'm going to do one more thing to that, which is the brush with a decent sort of a mid-range flow rate, and I'm just going to paint. Turn the auto mask off of this. I'm just going to paint over it. Now I'm going to add a boot full of texture to that, and that's going to help bring out that jet wash, as you can see there. And now just look at the before and after, but only the after we denoised it, from the edits from that stage. I think blue is still a little bit on the strong side, so I'm just going to use the saturation this time. Down, maybe just brighten it a little bit. And I think I am pretty happy with that. Might just check what the hue does. Yeah, I'm thinking that's very nice. And I think that will do for this edit. So I hope that gives you a little insight into how creative you can be, or certainly how much you can pull back an image that you thought had gone. And we'll just export that now. And I use my preset watermark. That will put that in the middle on the bottom. Put it in there. I've also selected where it's going to export to, and that just means when it's exported it will actually show me where it's put it. Export. Control Alt and F to exit full screen. Waiting for it to export file. And there it is. There is our finished item ready to be put on social media. So thank you for watching, and I really hope you can take something away from that. And any comments at all, we've got the Facebook group, Apex, the Aviation Photography Edit Exchange, and of course we now have this YouTube channel. So thank you so much for watching.